Yo, what's up? We are back again with another video. Today we're going to be talking about the other B tier dungeon, which I ranked as such, Sanguine Depths. Basically, for those who don't know, Sanguine Depths is, if I had to describe it, I would say it's like a combo. It would be like if Waycrest Manor was, or Toldagor was done like better. Like it is a tight dungeon with not a lot of room for innovation, but at the same time, it does the cramped manor feel in a pretty strong way. Basically, you're going to end up like running down these corridors, fighting a bunch of mobs, and periodically fighting bosses, very similar to how Toldagor and Waycrest Manor ended up functioning. That's kind of why I equated it somewhat similar to those. I feel like this is about as good as this dungeon is going to get in terms of like, I feel like Waycrest Manor and Toldagor left a lot to be desired because they were almost too narrow, and there's a lot of things that were wrong with those dungeons. With Sanguine Depths, they have built off of the fundamentals of what they wanted those dungeons to feel like and made it feel a little bit more reasonable. Okay, so let's talk about actually what are the good things with this dungeon. I actually think that the good parts of this dungeon are the bosses as a whole. And I feel like this is the case for a lot of Shadowlands dungeons, but even more so with Sanguine Depths. The first boss in this dungeon is not exactly the most notable thing, but he is not a terrible boss. Executioner Tarvold, which is the second boss in the instance, is actually quite interesting. You have to end up dodging these lines that will be coming from alternating sides while dealing with the mechanics of the Executor. And dodging these lines in this kind of cramped area is really weird, especially since you see the lasers coming from like a really far side and then just wrapping around the circle, and you know where you have to like pre-position. So you have to clear out some of the trash in the area and then jump back and forth from side to side. So that fight's actually pretty unique. The second one is the third boss in the instance is the Grand Protector. I think that this boss is kind of cool as well. But I do worry that it's going to get one-shotty because of some of the mechanics on this fight. Basically, the Grand Protector, every so often, they will drop balls on the ground. You have to pick up these balls, and it's 20% damage reduction per stack of them. And if you don't end up getting enough of them, you're going to end up getting blown up by her, I don't even know what it's called, her one-shot ability, which is just a boatload of AoE. I worry that that's going to get like problematic on Tyrannical because it's kind of hard to collect a bunch of balls. Basically, you need like 2 to 3 per person. While there is enough of them, they're spread out pretty far around the room. So making sure that you like set up quadrants beforehand to be able to grab these orbs is going to be important. As a whole, I do think that the fight is kind of cool. And then that takes us into the last boss of the instance, which is by far the most interesting, General Call. Basically, General Call has, I don't know, let's go ahead and say like 3 or 4 phases, and you have to like walk through a gauntlet of trash to fight General Call, while you are also at the same time fighting trash and getting a substantial amount of your count towards this end gauntlet. This is not a gauntlet similar to how Necrotic Wake was, where it's like the mobs will come out periodically and you aren't really in control of it. General Call's gauntlet is just a hallway of trash that you have to go through while you are fighting the boss. You do drop combat, which is actually important to note as well. And General Call himself, he has a couple of interesting mechanics. Most notably, he has like his AoE that you end up having to use the shield for. You end up getting a shield after the third boss, and using it will make you not get knocked back and not take just an absolute crap ton of damage. Once you do end up like making your way down the hallway, killing all the pride mobs that you have to fight along the way, which is I think cooler, because like spawning pride during the platform or during the boss and you're able to get like multiple pride buffs during that fight is, I think that that's absolutely just fantastic. So once you actually make your way down the hallway, kill off all your pride mobs, then you have to like dodge out of the way of mirror images from Call, while then also doing the dance of like getting back into melee, allowing your tank to use the shield and just not getting knocked off of the ledge. Beyond that, there's not like a ton of mechanics, but the mechanics that are present on this fight are incredibly cool. And I think the fact that you have to fight him with trash is actually just one of the most appealing things to me. So yeah, I'm actually super hot on all of the bosses inside of Sanguine Depths. I think that they're all really unique and they help this dungeon feel as it should. Like as a 4-boss instance that doesn't have the most amount of trash that you're able to pull together and like chain pull all the time, I think that the bosses here really kind of help carry the dungeon and make it feel like it should. The next thing I actually like about this dungeon is kind of the balance between inconsequential mobs and mobs that actually require a little bit more priority damage and priority focus. We're going to end up talking about these overseers in a little bit. but just the balance of how many difficult mobs there are in a dungeon, and a lot of them aren't like heavy kick rotation, they're just difficult because of like some of the effects that they do, in conjunction with there are like a lot of non-elites in the dungeon, which is kind of awkward. But even aside from those, there are a decent amount of mobs that are just more for pad and more for just like the aesthetic of the dungeon. And I think that mobs that are like that are for pad or for the aesthetic of the dungeon, in conjunction with mobs that are going to normally have more priority focus or need a little bit more tactics required and tactics surrounding how you're ending up dealing with the mobs themselves, is normally going to be for the better, just because of how it makes the player feel. Because like everybody loves to do an insane amount of damage, but at the same time you want to have a reason to be like pulling the pack. Like the pack needs to be doing something. It doesn't need to just be like some patchwork thing, but it should also feel like rewarding to kill, and there should be some mobs in there that make you do big damage, because small packs the whole entire time kind of feels lame. In addition to all that, for what is a dungeon that you end up having to walk down hallways a lot of the time, you don't go over count very much. I think you may end up going like about 5-ish% over, which you are able to skip some of the trash at the very beginning if you're really looking forward to, or you're really trying to. So there are ways to mitigate the overabundance of count just a little bit. So I think as a dungeon as a whole, you shouldn't get docked any points for that. I think that should be more of an upside. Sanguine Depths is like pretty straightforward with how you're going to have to play the dungeon. There's not a lot of diversions or extra routes that you're able to play, but being that it also doesn't just like completely punish you in the same way that Toldegor did in that facet. All right, so having spoken about the good things, let's talk about a couple of the downsides of this dungeon. The first downside, and the one that I think is the easiest to change, is that some of the trash is kind of tedious, and most notably the overseers. So while I feel like there is a good balance of how many like free mobs there are to mobs that need priority damage, the mobs that do need priority damage are kind of annoying. And they've also created a couple of trash packs that are off to the side that are just do not pull packs, but you wouldn't know that unless you've pulled them once and you're just like, oh, this is never going to happen. So the mob to look out for is the Grand Overseer. He puts a 15-second debuff on you that reduces your damage and healing by 3% per stack, and he reapplies stacks every 5 seconds. So it really limits your flexibility about being able to chain pull towards like the middle part of the dungeon, because there's like overseers in a couple of packs just back to back, to where I've even had it where the tank will pull a little bit too quickly and you'll accidentally refresh that Grand Overseer buff or debuff, and there's no real way to even get it off. Like you can't outrange it from what I've tested. It's not, at least not within 60 yards. And so that limits your ability to be able to like chain pull packs, which I think that if you were able to chain a lot of stuff together inside of Sanguine Depths, that would actually open up the dungeon a little bit more for innovative strategies. And the second reason that I docked at points was for those innovative strategies. I think that just pretty linear dungeons like this that are in tight corridors that you're not actually able to, the only way that you're actually able to have innovative strategies via chain pulling, and not so much like you're going to pull like two really unique packs together, or there's just like there's not a lot of room for new strategies to come forward. And that's why I think that I also docked it a couple of points. Not that I think that Sanguine Depths is actually a bad dungeon. I think that what it does and how it does it is done super well. I just think that for me personally, more often than not, I think that the strategy and the innovation behind dungeons and coming up with like new strategies from week to week, a fix to a fix, that kind of thing, is more often than not more the fun that I find for myself in Mythic Plus. So a dungeon like Sanguine Depths and a dungeon like Theater of Pain in my most recent video, both of which are fairly linear dungeons with not a lot of room for innovation. The upside of those dungeons is that they're done well for what they are. The downside is that it's not perfect. But at the end of the day, like, you have to have some linear dungeons, because I think linear dungeons are actually really good for the game. And I guess we're moving out of the downsides at this point. I do think that linear dungeons are good for the game, even though they do limit your strategy and your ability to show like unique skill sets, because I think that they, at the same time, like, not everybody wants to come up with like unique and game breaking strats. Like, there are some people who just want to walk a whole W straight through a dungeon, pull the pack that's right in front of them, and then get their weekly 15 and then just get out. And I respect that. And I think that dungeons like Sanguine Depths and Theater of Pain are absolutely perfect for you. And I think that more often than not, my preferred style is more open dungeons. So let's talk about how I would change Sanguine Depths if I would change anything at all. Most notably, I think I would probably change the density of how many of these overseers there are, or maybe look to rework how they work. I think that the 3% damage reduction per stack and reapplying stacks every 5 seconds is a little bit too punishing, especially once packs start to live a little bit longer. Like once you start to have your packs lived in the 45 second to a minute long range, you may start running into some problems with how many stacks of these debuffs that this Grand Overseer is actually going to be putting on you, and you're just like actually starting to sweat it a little bit. As it currently stands, packs in the Grand Overseer specifically is going to only end up lasting like in the 20 to 25 second range, especially if it's getting heavy priority damage. That will not be the case like once you're doing relevant content, right? So I think that maybe looking at how the Grand Overseers end up working is something I would take a gander at. Maybe a slight rebalance of count, because you do end up going slightly over if you hold W straight through the dungeon, so maybe like 5% less. Maybe you could just remove a Grand Overseer and that would like make the count perfect, but as a whole, I don't think that there's a lot of stuff that I would actually change about this dungeon. I think that this dungeon, for what it is, like I said earlier, is pretty well done, and I'm pretty happy with how Sanguine Depths has turned out. Even though it is a B tier dungeon, I think it's passable, right? It's above average even. It's the 80 to 89% range. So anyhow, with that said, I think that's going to be the end of the video today. I hope you guys have also all been enjoying these videos. If you guys have anything you have interesting opinions on in regards to Sanguine Depths, in regards to this series, any other video suggestions or ideas, I am definitely down and willing to hear them, and I hope you guys would comment them down in the description. Do me a favor, like and subscribe to this video, helps me out. With that, I think that'll be it for today. We'll be back tomorrow with another video. I think we're going to be doing Mists of Tyr Scythe, which will be our first A tier dungeon. So we're going to get into the A and S tier range, where we're going to end up talking about why I actually believe that some of the dungeons are more superior than others more often than not. So we're going to talk about that. And yeah, that's just going to be it for the video today. And I hope to see you guys in the video tomorrow.